Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Tori Linder. I'm a conservationist and impact producer. And for the last 2 months, I've been on a road trip across America, meeting biologists, conservationists, storytellers, and tribal leaders, exploring the opportunity to bolster regional wildlife corridor efforts. We know habitat loss is the leading driver of extinction globally. It goes without saying then that the issues we've discussed over the last 3 days do not exist in a vacuum here in Florida. States across our nation are asking how they balance the needs of a growing population while protecting our natural environment. I'm honored to be in conversation today with 3 conservation leaders who are answering exactly that question. Please welcome Beth Pratt, California Director of the National Wildlife Federation, though she prefers the title Cougar Lady. Bob Bendick, Director of the Nature Conservancy's Gulf of Mexico program. And Katie Allen, Director of Landscape Conservation at the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. So to kick things off, I'm going to ask our 3 panelists to introduce themselves and give us a quick snapshot of their work.
Thanks. It's been incredible to be here, and it just shows that Florida and California can get along and have a lot to share. The term Cougar Lady does not apply to the housewives of Los Angeles, but to our mountain lion population, which is really analogous to the Florida Panther. And I thank you, because it was Florida that really showed us what was going to happen if we didn't do something for our mountain lion population in the Los Angeles area, but also how to solve it. So it's been great being here and seeing that inspiration. I come from a national park background. When I was a little girl, I wanted to work in national parks and did that. I've been fortunate enough to work in Yellowstone. I worked in Yosemite for a decade and live outside Yosemite National Park. But I spent most of the last decade in the most improbable place you can think of to do wildlife conservation, which is Los Angeles. And to me, that is the future and what I focus on, how we can get wildlife and people to coexist. And I think that's what you are all doing so well here, and here to both learn and inspire and how we can share. But the #1 threat to wildlife worldwide is the loss of habitat, as you're seeing in Florida. And I feel like it's been my life work, and I will continue to see how we can look at solutions where wildlife and people can survive in these interfaces.
Good morning. I'm Bob Bendick. Could I have the first slide, please? Okay. I'm the Gulf of Mexico Director of the Nature Conservancy. This is the place where I work. Excuse me. It is like a giant wildlife corridor. The Florida Wildlife Corridor is nested within that, as are many other landscapes and corridors. And it's a fascinating place to work. I've worked for the Nature Conservancy for 27 years, first as Florida State Director, then Regional Director, other things, back now to home in the Gulf of Mexico. Next slide. This is an image we'll talk about a little bit later, but it is the resilient and connected network that Nature Conservancy scientists have put together over the last 12 years to create what you might call a blueprint for saving all species in North America in this era of climate change. And it represents the scientific idea about corridors and wildlife corridors. Next. This is an image from the Network for Landscape Conservation, on which I'm a board member. It is a group across the U.S. that works on creating corridors and networks, and particularly supporting practitioners. These are the grants that the network has given to landscapes to get them going on large-scale conservation. The key is there are about 70 grants given, but 600 grants, 600 applications. There's a great movement across the country. In the next and final slide, a great movement across the country to, from the bottom up, create wildlife corridors and large landscape conservation. So we have science on the one hand, popular interest in saving their places brought together in the movement we see across the U.S. Thanks.
And here's your map of those partnerships.
These are the overlapping partnerships beginning to show that much of the U.S. is covered by people who want to do what you're doing.
And I'm Katie Allen. I'm Director of Landscape Conservation for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. A realm and not merely a trail is the full aim of our efforts. And don't quote me on that. That was the visionary Benton Mackay when he put his proposal for the trail in writing in 1921. But I have picked up the charge for the past about 3 years with the ATC as the Director of Landscape Conservation, and taking from this vision where we are now as a trail is the longest hiking-only path in the world that ranges from 2,189.4 miles from Maine to Georgia across 14 states. But it's simply not just a footpath, and I don't want to underestimate the power of this footpath, but it wasn't really created to be a walking path. It was a means to experiencing the natural, scenic, and cultural resources of this landscape. And adding further complexity to that conversation is that the AT itself, this footpath, is set in an important corridor which now, more than ever, has become the backbone journey for not just hikers, but for plants and animals as they're adapting to climate change. So this image that I'm showing currently is a model from the University of Washington in partnership with the Nature Conservancy to show 2,900 species current habitat and their future predicted habitats and the movement that they're going to take in the landscape. And I think you can see that the Appalachian mountain range in this landscape stands out more than any other place in the country, and how important it is to mitigation and adaptation for all. On the next slide, I'll just share that the AT is considered a premier public-private partnership engaged in the conservation and management of a nationally significant resource. The responsibility for managing this land of the Appalachian Trail fall to the 30 trail clubs that are all volunteer, the ATC, our state and federal partners, in a remarkable collaborative partnership called the Appalachian Trail Cooperative Management System. But it doesn't stop there. I'll say that the realm is really what we're going after, and we can't do that alone. So the ATC, in partnership with the National Park Service, have co-convened the Appalachian Trail Landscape Partnership, which is the largest scaled conservation partnership working in collaboration on the East Coast to bring hundreds of conservation organizations to usher the conservation work necessary to connect and protect the natural resources of this landscape, and working at a scale of 27 million acres. In this slide, you'll see the backbone of the trail, that AT landscape for which the partnership is, but then this much larger potential corridor that I'll speak to a little bit later. On the next slide, I just want to also highlight that as a primary NGO in service to the protection of the Appalachian Trail and a stakeholder in this much larger landscape, ATC's work also includes stewardship efforts to maintain a functional ecosystem and protect biodiversity through aquatic habitat restoration projects, invasive species management, and adaptive management of rare, threatened, and endangered species. With over almost 2,000 occurrences of rare, threatened, and endangered species, this is one of the most biodiverse park units in the entire national park system. So conservation for us will always be local, absolutely, but in action will be celebrated project by project. But our vision for the Appalachian Trail landscape is huge, and our aspirations are endless. So happy to kind of get more into that today. So thank you all for having me.
Fantastic, thank you. I will note at the end of this conversation, we're going to be opening up the dialogue to our audience, so please be thinking of questions you may have for our panelists. To kick it off, I'm going to ask a question of all three of you. So when we hear of the challenges before us with the biodiversity and climate crises, it's easy to not be overwhelmed to be overwhelmed as a member of the public. Yet time and time again, we see our greatest conservation successes coming from the ground up, groups of farmers, fishermen, tribal leaders, and hunters, among others, working together to protect the land and waters they call home. Can you each speak to the role of partnerships and communities in your work?
Yeah, actually, let me show a video to demonstrate that before I answer it in words, right? Can we cue up the video? I think people are everything.
Thousands packed the Greek Theater today to celebrate the life of P22, a famous mountain lion who lived for years in Griffith Park.
Only in LA would a beautiful wild animal like P22 come and live, and residents would demand and clamor that he be allowed to stay here, and stay he did for over a decade.
P22 is way more than a celebrity. He is an important ambassador for urban wildlife. P22's legacy will live on in his contributions to wildlife conservation and also our heightened awareness of how to live in harmony with nature. And he even got me to the Greek.
The LA Times calls him the most famous animal since Lassie. But there was 9 Lassies and there was only one P22.
I had the distinct pleasure of being P22's representative in Congress, where one of my highest priorities has been to protect more of the public lands that P22 called home. That work will continue with P22's spirit guiding us every step of the way.
California is demonstrating people and nature can thrive together.
We need to not just live in harmony in nature, but we have to recognize that we are nature. And what happens to them happens to us. We are all connected.
We have been part of one of the greatest wildlife stories in history, all because we realize the most important thing we can do for another being is to let them be who and what they are.
P22, you inspired me to become an architect so I could build more wildlife crossing bridges to support the movement of wildlife. Thank you.
He changed us. He changed the way we look at LA as he inspired millions of people to see wildlife as their neighbors. We are part of nature, and he reminded us of that.
It's amazing that he persisted for 10 years and that you all and everyone coexisted with him in an amazing way for that time. So I just want to say to P22, thank you for the lessons that you taught us. Thank you for the impressions you made on us. And thank you for the legacy you left us. Long live P22.
All right, and I want you to sing along with me. P22, P22, you left behind a lot of friends and cougar poo. P22, oh P22, all of Los Angeles is gonna miss you.
So I think that video shows, I won't go on too much in the interest of time, but for me, and this is a different approach than I took in my 20s to this work, it is not about me telling people that they need to build a wildlife crossing or how they respond to a beloved cat. I mean, when you get a mountain lion selling out the Greek Theater in 2 hours, it's about empowering connections and respecting that everybody connects to wildlife differently. The one thing I want to point out, we had the director of Caltrans, the largest transportation agency in the world, speak at a memorial for mountain lions. That's long-term movement building, as well as a hip-hop artist from Watts writing songs about P22. And I feel like if you take the long game and build those movements and know your communities, the rest becomes easy in building support, not just for one crossing, but for many.
So, if you look at these projects and wildlife corridors and large landscape projects across the country, they all put collaboration first. You don't do anything without collaboration these days. It's not the way it's always been, but the Network for Landscape Conservation is all about collaboration and including, and most extremely importantly, collaboration with folks and interests who have not been involved in this process before. Tribes, underserved communities, working farmers and ranchers. Everybody has to be at the table to get things done today. And if you look at success around the country or failure, collaboration, success, do what you want failure.
Yeah, and I think that the Appalachian Trail is also one of those places that wouldn't exist without people and people's time with it. It exists today and is open for all without a free fee or anything like that because volunteers are out there to manage the trail. And so that is a backbone for sure of how we're able to connect. But how do you connect with somebody to inspire them to that type of action? And we have 3 to 5 million people. It's hard to track how many people are out on the trail each year. But these are folks that are walking their dog every day and finding themselves looking at beautiful vistas that they've been coming to visit every year since they were kids. It's only 1% that's doing that through hike. And so it's those everyday folks that love the trail are the ones that we're speaking to and trying to find the ways that our organization with our partners can facilitate those small actions that can be transformative just for the individual, for the community, but ultimately add up to this big, large landscape vision. We do have a designation program very similar to Florida for trail towns, the Appalachian Trail Community Program, where we have 56 designated communities that have come to us to say, we want to celebrate our proximity to the trail, and we want to help out as we, in ways that work for us, and we welcome that, and we are looking to grow that network expansively over from Maine to Georgia. But meeting our communities where they are is so important, and we have also launched it's wonky terms like social science and human dimension, but it's really coming to meet people where they are so that we can form our decisions around what folks are, how they think about their landscape. So we might think in terms of biodiversity, but they want to talk about clean water. They want to talk about what's happening in their backyards. And so having that information has been incredibly helpful to bridge our networks between our conservation partners, our federal land managers, and our communities.
Wonderful. So we have on a stage with us today P22 in the form of an iconic photo taken by our dear friend and collaborator at the Path of the Panther project, Steve Winter. Our favorite Panther photographer, Carlton Ward, could not resist the opportunity to be on the floor here capturing.
I just love that you're taking a photo of P22 that Steve Winter took. We have to send that to him, yeah.
Truly, the story of P22, the movement that you and Steve have built, it's iconic. It was so much of the basis of our work at the Path of the Panther project, and that ranged from calling for pep talks when camera traps misfired, to really identifying your keen ability to build a movement with an urban audience on an issue that would otherwise seem so disconnected from their everyday lives. Can you talk to us about the role storytelling played in the establishment of the corridor?
Yeah, I mean, I thought Gabby gave a great talk, which was basically our approach as well. Story's everything. I would guess none of us in this audience got involved with wildlife because somebody handed you a scientific paper, right? Now, I'm a scientist. It's not my day job, but I'm a scientist. You need the science, but it'll only get you halfway. I mean, how many endangered species have gone extinct despite reams of science? We connect to stories. I connected because I watched Born Free as a kid or Red Wind in the Willows. And I'm going to tell you right now, stop thinking anthropomorphizing is bad. I mean, even the science is showing us that we are close to animals, that we behave the same. And it's that relationship that's allowing people to build relationships day to day with wildlife is what we need to do better at. And I think a story like P22 allowed people to connect in very different ways. Again, whether you're a hip hop artist from Watts, whether you're a mural artist, whether you're a child that wants to be an architect, we could go on and on. We had a gay rights activist who connected to P22 and saw him as a social justice model because Griffith Park was one of the forefronts of the gay rights movement, and also because P22 never had kids, right? So it's connecting people to these stories in really different ways, which I think is so key. And I think we lost in the environmental movement for a while. We kept people at a distance from wildlife. So find your story. The last thing I will say is you don't need megafauna. Look at how the public has shifted in their attitude towards bees. Fellow Gen Xers, you all know when we were kids, it was the swarm and the killer bees were coming for us, right? And now it's like, oh, bees, what can we do for you, right? So you can use this for any wildlife, large and small. You just need the right story, and it is so important to do that.
Absolutely. Never underestimate the power of a well-told story. So Bob, my next question is for you. As you touched on in your introduction, under the leadership of Dr. Mark Anderson, the Nature Conservancy has presented some wonderful science with the Resilient Connected Lands Network. Can you tell us more about that and how it correlates with your work on the Gulf Coast?
You mean the Connected Resilient System? Yes. So the Nature Conservancy, and particularly a great scientist named Mark Anderson, have spent the last 12 years trying to define, in the era of climate change, what it is that needs to be protected, not only now, but in the future, and have created a map for North America. The ingredients are quite complex. Hundreds of scientists have worked on, vetted, modified, changed it. It includes both the flow of animals north and up, and what kind of habitats are needed to facilitate that transition. It includes a lot of local input from our chapters around the world. It is not the end all of things, but it is a working document, as Mark Anderson will freely admit, that tells us what and where and how. Not so much how, more what and where. And the wildlife corridor is certainly consistent with and part of that resilient connected network. In the Gulf of Mexico program, we try to look at the coast and make sure that those areas are protected. An example of this sort of thing is marsh migration. With sea level rise, marshes will either disappear or migrate landward. You have to provide room for that. The river corridors of the South are very important migratory pathways for both in the short term and in the long term. So it's, I don't like to use the word blueprint because there's some flexibility to it, but it's a good guide with great scientific support for thinking about how and where we do landscape scale conservation.
And Katie, would you mind elaborating on how that science is informing your work at the ACT?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely have adopted it and trying to find how we define our work at the scale of the Appalachian Trail Landscape Partnership. We find that it's a great backbone of that science that we can interpret about where we can start to identify the priorities, but it's also a tool for us to be able to layer those values that I spoke about that are informed by our community and the resource that we're protecting, the Appalachian Trail. So we also layer on things like scenic view sheds, visual resources, and cultural resources, and other elements that all together help to point where we could be heading. With that tool in hand, we know where those where we can start to define understanding of our pinch points of what's really the highest value in terms of biodiversity and connectivity, but also the realities of what's happening on the ground. Where is development happening? How are pressures of people moving into our Appalachian landscape shifting how we approach conservation? And I'll say that looking at that and using that information, we know that our current corridor is actually 32% protected, but if we were to really reach for a goal of 50% or more, we're looking at an opportunity of over 15 million acres to set our sights on. But in a couple of years ago, we looked at what a climate corridor really could mean, because we know we're just one piece of this, and there's so much more to this connected and resilient landscape that just as we are a practice of the corridor around the Appalachian Trail, it's so important to be connected to other efforts and see that this web of conserved space means, because we're going to benefit from all of those ecosystem services in our communities, but the connection between biodiversity and the corridors to connect that migration of of that ability to keep everything functioning. So 2 years ago, we launched a report kind of around designing a climate corridor that put the perspective on a much bigger Appalachian corridor using TNC's data as the backbone. And just kind of some of the findings around that is that, you know, as a call to action, we need to be thinking much bigger, and that leads us to a lot of those connections that with even the state like Florida and so much that you have going on, just always a reminder that all of this is very much connected.
Wonderful. So Beth, you've done it. You've raised over $100 million for this historic crossing that's
I'm not
coming
even a
to LA.
fundraiser. I don't know how I did it. Yeah.
I think you might be.
Yeah.
The crossing's under construction. It's coming to life. We're seeing record investment in wildlife crossings across our country with the Inflation Reduction Act and other pieces of legislation. What's next for you?
Yeah, you know, I don't remember my last day off in my last vacation, but before P22 died, got to sit with him. And even though it was this monumental effort, we were told we were crazy early on, much like a lot of folks in Florida were told when you were doing your work as well. But I made him a promise we wouldn't stop. You know, for me, it's sort of a moral compass. And I was really fortunate. Wallace Annenberg, who of course was a huge private investor in the Wallace Annenberg Wildlife Crossing, which if you want to see the construction, 101wildlifecrossing.org, we have a live webcam on it, and inviting you all out if you want a tour of the construction site. It'll be done in 2025. But I just couldn't stop. We just did this wildlife crossing road trip similar to yours, Tori, with Steve Winter, and it was heartbreaking, the amount of roadkill. And P22 himself, you know, got hit by a car at the end. And so we're gonna do more. Wallace came to me and said, we need to do more, and I'm gonna put up 10 million, and you start this wildlife crossing fund. And I crazily agreed to raise $500 million, $500 million in private funds to match the public dollars to help all of your efforts. See me if you have a project. And this is not something that's gonna sit in a bank. We raise it, it's gonna go out the door. We're fortunate right now to have the director of Caltrans on the board, as well as this Secretary of Natural Resources in California and the Annenberg Foundation. And I'm gonna do it because I owe it to all of you and I owe it to all the wildlife. We're gonna make more of these happen. Long term, we want them to be embedded in transportation budgets or other budgets, but for now, you know, the wildlife can't wait. So I'm exhausted, but exhilarated to also be taking this on. We're gonna get more of these built. And don't let them tell you they're crazy.
I'm really excited personally to see this work come to life. Bob and Katie, similarly, the movement for wildlife corridors is taking off across our country. We obviously cannot have the built infrastructure of a wildlife crossing without those critical linkages of green space connected on both sides. Can you both talk to us about the remarkable opportunities available right now at a federal level, many of which folks in this room might have the capacity to tap into, but also from your perspective, what remains our greatest challenge to accelerating the pace of conservation of landscape connectivity across our country?
So all sorts of language about regional and collaboration and connections is appearing in federal legislation and appropriations bills and the Inflation Reduction Act and the BIL, bipartisan infrastructure law, are full of language for the first time that suggests that working on connectivity and that sort of thing are critical. So the America the Beautiful program has language which says projects that invest in corridors, connectivity, and collaborative conservation are to be given priority. The NOAA Climate Resilience Challenge, now being competed for, talks about regional collaboration and connection in coastal regions. There's been a lot of talk about fish passage, and there are new fish passage bills for both everybody and for tribes require connectivity in rivers. Where there's been talk here about the USDA's programs and NRCF's, they're trying to think on a regional basis. So there's lots of opportunity out there, actually more opportunity than ever before in my long career for money available for the kinds of things that we want to do. The challenge for organizations across the country that are trying to do what the Florida Wildlife Corridor is doing is capacity, is the ability, particularly in disadvantaged communities, tribes, and underserved areas, rural areas particularly. How do you get the money? How do you do the planning? How do you accomplish the collaboration that the government wants you to undertake? And so in the meetings on this nationally, that comes up as number one as the challenge. How do we, citizens, ranchers, groups of people around the country who want to do something at the landscape scale, have the capacity to write these proposals, to get people together, to do the planning necessary to be successful in the competition? The Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation is actually performing that function of coordination and bringing people to the table like all of you, but that's not true all over the country.
Fantastic. And Katie, do you have any additional thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for our trail, the complexities of working across 14 states and learning from you all of how a state can be transformational in pulling down these federal dollars and for conservation. We definitely have some challenges of working across that 14 states, but I think a differentiator for ourselves too is the outdoor recreation space, and I think even between the National Trails System Act and a lot of the collaborative coalitions there that have either worked to get the full funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund that can set in motion for the National Trail System to use their authority that is relatively unlimited to support the National Trail System is amazing. We also have seeing outdoor recreation alliances beat the drum for more conserved land, for both this shared use of outdoor recreation and the compatible conservation. So it's something that's, I think, very cutting edge in how we're trying to even look at wildlife crossings where there is this shared interaction with humans as they hike. And this is uncharted territory for a lot of states as they begin to pull down this unprecedented dollars, and who are they going to talk to about that? We hope that our partnership is there to co-create the implementation of these guidances. And so we've been really out there trying to see that happens. But there's bottlenecks to the efficiencies of just getting it done. And so again, to the extent that our partners with our savviness and the skill set of either doing the deals for land protection or the science that we have already at our fingertips, we just have to do a bit better of getting that in front of folks so that they can translate what's already happening into partnerships. And the plans behind them are critical to seeing that money come through the work through the system to get to the projects.
Fantastic. I think I'm coming away with an understanding that collaboration, capacity building, and connective tissue is going to be key to building these movements across our country, and hopefully one day realizing a connected, protected network of lands. With that, I would love to open it up to the audience. We have time for a question or two, if anyone would like to raise their hand. We may be without questions this morning, in which case, okay, great. I believe we have a microphone runner coming your way. Okay.
How can we get the Florida Trail hooked up to the AT?
Yeah, it's a great question. An act of Congress, actually. But it's not an unheard of concept, and I think this is actually a great example of what partnership and understanding the realities of how the systems work, that our governmental barriers are not actual barriers, thinking about jurisdictions and things like that. So you know, there's a coalition of folks that want to see it moved through Georgia and Alabama, so there's potentially a potential to bring the Florida Trail up to meet that work. Also say there's an international AT coalition looking to see that it go all the way to Nova Scotia. But I think in our work too, we see that, especially because we have such a populous East Coast, that as we continue to grow this conservation movement, we also need to think about that access for recreation. And so having just more opportunity and those connections happen, it's really, like I go back to, the trail, it's not about the trail, it's about the landscape. So having these opportunities, the web of trails mixed and balanced with the web of conservation, it just becomes this rich landscape for which we can also build our communities, think about sustainable communities, and think about these critical connections. So I'm all for it, yeah, but we have to get in front of Congress.
Well said. I think we have time for another question here.
For me, I can take a stab at. I'm not as well aware of if there is this full scope, but in the Appalachians there is a burgeoning connected tribal-led Appalachian corridor conversation to do just that, of linking the specific traditional and very cultural significant landscapes together in access. So what access looks like or what that means to be determined, but looking at the protection priorities and the access needs as they build sort of that partnership to connect. But that's definitely a challenge for where we sit as the Park Service as a managing entity of the Appalachian Trail, and sort of this federal government to sovereign government relationship that we're definitely trying to be there to support our federal partners to get to the table, to have them engage in those conversations. But there's absolutely a leveraged part that if we can open up this co-stewardship conversation, would be transformational to the access to these significant cultural resources.
And just to build on that, I'll say there are great organizations, particularly working across the American West, such as the Intertribal Buffalo Council. They're working with 84 tribes to restore bison across the Great Plains and beyond. At an individual level, you're seeing tribes such as the Shoshone on the Wind River Reservation bordering the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, or the Blackfeet in northern Montana, working to establish connectivity as they restore bison as a keystone species. And so we haven't yet seen that unfold as a unified national effort, but we're seeing some great regional successes.
There are specific set-asides in a lot of this legislation for tribes, which is a great step forward.
Absolutely. We have time for one more question. Yes.
Hey, Tori, thank you. I appreciate hearing
Well, I can talk a bit to that. The Network for Landscape Conservation has had a series of meetings with AFWA, the National Association of State Wildlife Agencies. And the National Association of State Wildlife Agencies actually has a resolution, I believe, on regional or large landscape conservation. And when I talked about the need for collaboration earlier, sportsmen have to be front and center at the table and play a major role in this. And partners like the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership are great spokespeople for sportsmen's interests, as is AFWA. There's the RAWA bill now in Congress, Restoring America's Wildlife, that would provide vast amounts of funding to better integrate fish and wildlife interests with others in thinking about large landscape conservation.
Thank you. So with that, I'm going to ask each of you to leave us with a closing thought for our audience.
I would say it's pretty simple. Find your P22. Find that story. Not to just inspire love, but action. And I think that is the way forward.
So I woke up in the middle of the night, as I often do, to think about what I would say at the end of this panel. And if I can read my own writing at midnight, I'll just talk a bit about it. Some years ago, with evening coming on, my wife and I were paddling a canoe on isolated Lake Russell, not far from here. As we approached the place where Reedy Creek enters the lake, flights of white ibis passed so close overhead that we could hear the beating of their wings. A big gator slid from the bank into the lake, and in the gathering darkness around, a barred owl called from the woods. As you know from your own experiences outdoors, the land and water have a story to tell about both the past and the way forward. The success of the Florida Wildlife Corridor is in part about interpreting and their ability to interpret and tell that story in a way that brings people to understand that is also their story. Yes, we in Florida can learn from other places, but your work is a lesson important to others around the country who are seeking their own pathways for a future where both nature and people thrive.
That's beautiful, and if that's what stirs you in the middle of the night, then I am definitely not as eloquent. So this is hard to follow from that. But I think for me, kind of that, the elements of storytelling and the connection to humans is, ourselves and the space is transformational to this whole work. And I think from what I've learned working on the Appalachian Trail is, well, one, the global significance we have. So I know we've been talking about Florida here this week, that it almost feels daunting to keep scaling up, but being able to share the story that you all have, even at that, thinking about the global connections that we have all together, would love to continue to have those conversations, even if it's the next level up to the Appalachian corridor. But the global significance of the East Coast in meeting our needs for climate adaptation are definitely the call to action now. But I also reflect on the fact that the Appalachian Trail is over 100 years old. My organization is turning 119 in 2025. That's a long timeline to build the trust, the capacity, the action to get something done. But the fact that 100 years ago we were thinking about that, and that there was a result, and that isn't the iconic footpath is that is the Appalachian Trail, means to me a success story, and that we are putting in place right now what is going to be the change that can be in the world for what we need to answer right now. So though it's a lot to think about, we have the pieces in place to make it happen.
Fantastic. Well, I'm leaving this conversation encouraged that we're going to realize a connected network of protected lands across this country. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank you.